Everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the legislative update, the first legislative update for 2023. And this is a really important session because this year is a budget year. I am going to ask everyone to mute your audio if you haven't already done so. I will go through a little bit of the introductions and the procedures. I am Sunny Learcamp. As I said, I am co-vice president of the Brown County League. And I have a background, a little bit of a political background, as having been an elected prosecutor in Hamilton County for several years before I moved to Brown County about 10 and a half years ago. I want to make sure that you know that the sponsors of this legislative update include the League of Women Voters for Bloomington and Monroe County, the League of Women Voters for Brown County, the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce, and the Brown County Chamber of Commerce. And we thank them for their sponsorships. When it comes time to ask your questions, you will be asked or prompted to unmute. I want to explain that we have invited all of the legislative, and I would ask Sherry for you to go to the next slide, please. We have asked the representatives for Brown County and Monroe County. These include Senate Districts 41 and 44 and State Representative Districts 46, 60, 61, and 62. And the legislators who were invited included Senator Cook, Senator Shelley Roeder, Representative Bob Heaton, Representative Peggy Mayfield, Representative Matt Pierce, and Representative Dave Hall. The senator with us today is Senator Shelley Yoder, and the representative with us today is Matt Pierce. And we thank you so much for making the time to do this with us today. Now, if we could go to the next slide, we'll kind of review how we're going to proceed from here. First of all, we want everyone to understand this is an informative session, not a debate. It is time for you to ask questions about legislation that you may be interested in. And we ask that you please be very civil and respectful in your conversations and your questions. Each legislator at the beginning, I'm having a little tongue twisting today. I apologize. Each legislator will have 10 minutes for opening remarks. Then after legislator remarks, you may ask a question one at a time. To ask a question, just go into the chat and send a private chat to the question moderator. And all you need to say is, I have a question. You will be called upon in the order that your request to ask a question has been received. You will have 1 minute to ask your question. And then the senator and representative will each have 2 minutes to respond to your question. If you have a second question, go back in the queue, say you have another question, and if we have time, then we will come back and ask you again to ask your question. Both of the legislators will be given the opportunity to respond to all of the questions. Please make sure and note that this session is being recorded by the Community Access Television Services. And by participating in this process, you are agreeing to be recorded. The order of who answers questions will be rotated by me, the moderator. I think that even covers the next screen, if I'm not right, Sherry. So I think with all of that having been said, we are ready now to start with the legislators and their opening remarks. We will start with Senator Yoder, ladies first. So Senator Yoder, are you prepared to make your own opening remarks?
Yes, thank you so much, Sunny. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I am on my way to Crown Point for a full day of hockey with our son. I'm not driving, but I hope that you can hear me okay and that the reception is good. A couple of things I want to get started on. Here we are. We just concluded week 2 and some priorities that we've been working on. To give you a little update, I serve on the Health Committee, on Education, on Utilities, Commerce and Technology, and the Environment, as well as Rules. And already we have heard some pretty one disturbing bill that we'll get to, and some interesting proposals that we're going to be talking about, initiatives that we're going to be talking about for this session. In public health, maybe you have heard about the governor's public health initiative, but the number is SB4, and it's to create a public health commission in the state of Indiana. And the State Department of Health, under the leadership of Dr. Box and a former Senator Luke Kenley, they've been making the rounds to explain what SB4 wants to get accomplished. And basically it's a chance to expand what we haven't been investing in the last 2 decades, and that is in the public health of Hoosiers. They conducted a pretty extensive study over this past year, and what we know is we've lacked investment in public health, and as a result, the life expectancy, Sunny, it's contagious, life expectancy in Indiana is decreasing. And this SB4 is an infusion of money and putting local health departments, local counties or local health departments, giving them an opportunity to opt in to receive the money and be in a partnership with the State Department of Health, with this Public Health Commission, to identify together what initiatives and where are the lapses that need to be addressed in public health, and try to create a stronger safety net when it comes to public health in our state of Indiana. That's a priority in public health, along with behavioral health. That is SB1, and that is really addressing the behavioral health infrastructure in Indiana and what that's going to look like and how we're going to fund it. For me, I'd love to hear for those on the call. Those seem to be good measures, and I want to hear back from those of you who are on this call what your thoughts are on that. In public education, one of the first bills we heard was a pretty much universal expansion of vouchers under the guise of expanding educational savings accounts in the state of Indiana. That bill is SB 305, and we heard that bill this week in education. I've heard from you. This is not the direction that we want to go for the state of Indiana, certainly not in our district. And we're really working very hard to defeat this bill and hopefully defeat it in committee. In environment, last year we passed the ability for the Indiana Utilities Regulatory Commission to create the ability for small modular reactors in the state of Indiana, and already that passed, and already we're seeing legislation to increase that capacity. Last year, we were promised we would keep them small, and the limit for electricity creation was 350 megawatts. We're already seeing a bill to increase it to 470 megawatts. in small modular reactors. And that's something we're going to be discussing in utilities and in the environment. The Environment Committee has a new chair. I'm the ranking minority chair in environment. And I have a climate solutions task force bill that we've been working on for the last couple of years. A group of students created this over the last 2 years. And finally, I've been told it's going to get a hearing. So I would love some activism there, some reaching out to your legislators to let them know that we want to hear this bill. We want this bill to go up for a vote. It's really just to create a solutions task force in the state of Indiana instead of having climate solutions siloed, bringing together a body to look at a way forward for Indiana. Some of my initiatives, things I'm working on, that I filed 15 bills, 4 of which are getting good traction. I have an expansion of contraceptive access in the state of Indiana. It's for long-acting reversible contraceptive care that is getting some good traction. Hopefully we'll get a hearing. I'd love some help advocating for that bill. There's also, as I mentioned, the Climate Solutions Task Force doing some work in expanding Medicare for those with disabilities. I'm getting some traction there, as well as a repeal of feminine hygiene products. I hopefully have some support in getting that repealed this year, and would love your help and your response and thoughts on that matter. So with that, I don't know how much time I've had. Sunny, how much more time do I have?
You still have 3.5 minutes.
Excellent. Because I do want to touch on Senate Joint Resolution 1 that provides that a person who poses a substantial risk to the public is not entitled to be to release by bail. And that did pass out of committee, and that is a joint Senate joint resolution. We are hearing that, and it will get a vote in the whole body on Monday. Well, at least it's on the calendar. And would like an opportunity to talk to those on this call about this. Removing right now in the state of Indiana, people have a right to bail if unless they have been convicted of murder or treason. But this would would make it so anybody who has a substantial threat, what that means is yet to be determined. If you are considered to be a substantial threat to the public, a judge could not have, bail would not be an option. So it's really at the discretion of a judge. And my fear is, once again, it's going to be, what we're going to see is greater discrimination in our criminal justice system. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that matter as well. So with that, I'll be quiet. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and having a good, robust conversation this morning.
Shelley, thank you very much. You actually still had about 1.5 minutes. Is this joint resolution, does that have to be a constitutional amendment?
So we will have to hear it the way that the Constitution reads, and Matt's probably can speak to this. It will have to pass out of this session, but it would have to, we have to have a general election in between the passing of this twice, I believe, before it before the Constitution can be amended. So if we pass it this year, we would have to pass it again next year. We would have a general election, and then it would have to pass again the following year.
Shelley, I can help you out on that a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I was
so
going to say, go ahead, Matt.
right. So a proposed constitutional amendment has to be adopted by 2 separately elected general assemblies. So if this General Assembly, which was just elected, adopts that joint resolution that says we should amend the Constitution to get rid of this right to bail, they would have to wait until after the next general election. So that would be the 24 election. And so then in the January 25 or 26 session, they would have to pass it a second time. And then once that's been passed a second time, then it goes to the voters at the next general election for their, for them to vote on it or not, referendum. So it's a pretty long process. So you're going to have to get through this General Assembly, the next General Assembly, and then it'll show up, if it were to pass 2 times, then it'll show up on that next general election.
Thank you, Matt, for that clarification. It's a little different than just a regular bill.
That's right. And so I did have it right, although Matt did a much better job of explaining it. But yes, it's not a fast process, but it got out of committee and it's going to be on the floor in the Senate on Monday. So definitely would want to hear from you on how you feel about that.
Matt, I would like to have you go ahead and give your opening remarks now, and you have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'll start out with the budget, which obviously in the long session, that's probably the most important thing we get done. And we have all the traditional, discussions about what is the proper level of funding for education. And Shelley mentioned that, there's just a relentless move to really arrive at a point where we don't even fund public schools anymore. Money just goes directly to the parents, and then they just choose how they want to purchase education. That really is where they're trying to get to. But they just know that when they started down this path 10 years ago, if they'd stood up on the House floor and said, yeah, we're going to vote to move to a system in which we just hand money directly to the parents and then they have to go out and shop for their education. And we're not going to fund our public schools directly. And you know what? If they don't get enough parents sign up to spend their money with the public school, then, oh, well, I guess it'll have to close. Well, that's a pretty radical notion. And I don't think most people would go along with that. And so instead, what they've done is they've had this relentless, incremental approach to get to their ultimate goal. And it's interesting because what they're doing comes right out of policymaking textbooks, if you read about it. So it says you do things incrementally to get to the big policy, and you start out with very sympathetic constituencies. So you might recall that the vouchers got started under Mitch Daniels when he said, well, if we have students who have tried the public schools, they've been there at least a year, it's not meeting their needs, particularly poor people in inner city schools, minorities, so it's a civil rights issue. Let's give them the same option as wealthy people and give them a voucher. And so, that sounds pretty convincing. But then, of course, after that, they immediately began expanding the criteria. So now we're up to, wealthy people getting this. And they've created all kinds of other avenues to divert that public school money away into private and religious schools. And then you've got the charter schools. And so we're just seeing we're getting kind of to the tipping point here because, they've always, what is driving this is this ideological belief put forth by the economist Milton Friedman that the way you improve schools is you inject, free market capitalism competition into the system. And by having each parent just get a pile of money from the Super Bowl, be a pretty good legislature. At that point, then sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here or something. So the thought was that, if the parents are basically choosing, they'll choose the best schools, the bad schools will go by the wayside, and we'll have this much better education system. So that's the Milton Friedman approach. Unfortunately, we've seen that it doesn't really work out that way, just with what limited experience we have. I mean, these non-public schools are not really doing that much better, if at all, in many cases worse than the public schools. And we've had a bunch of scandals. We had hundreds of millions of dollars squandered by so-called virtual charter schools. That's still, out there trying to get settled. And then the other thing that we saw happening is that when you give a family, say, here's $7,000, go spend it on some education, some of the schools were saying like, hey, if you sign up with us, we'll rebate some of your money back to you. Or we'll provide you with all these great, we'll give you a television set or something. And so you essentially had a kickback system being created where parents were being, could be induced to choose a school based on how much money might flow back to their, their personal family budgets. So anyway, there's lots to be concerned about there, but this is just what's going on. It's just a relentless march to get to this Milton Friedman kind of everybody gets a voucher kind of world. So, we'll have to see how that continues to play out. So when it comes to the budget, I think the two big issues this year, other than the perennial ones that we always talk about, is this proposal from the governor for significant investment in public health, and to finally, after years of Democrats pointing out that like we're 45th in the country in our funding for public health and all the things we're not getting done in the health area, we finally have a governor who's put a commission together, quantified the problems and the issues and the need, and he stepped forward and said we need to fund this program. Well, the leaders of the General Assembly in his own party seemed pretty lukewarm to his proposal and kind of immediately said, well, maybe we'll give him half. So we'll have to see how that issue pans out about how much money this initiative actually gets to bolster all the county local health departments and allow them to finally do the kind of public health initiatives that are required to really attack problems we have in Indiana. And it's pretty sad when you look at it. I mean, we're like top in smoking, diabetes, obesity, many baseline, health metrics. Indiana is not very good. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that we just have not put the resources into programs that could help attack those problems. So I'm hopeful that the governor will prevail in his struggle with his own Republican leaders in the General Assembly on that. The second thing that he proposed, which I quite frankly am elated about, is finally eliminating textbook fees for parents in public schools, which ironically, I think that they provide tax credits to parents in private schools to cover their textbooks, but they won't pay for textbooks in public schools. And so the governor has proposed that. And I mean, the Democrats, again, like 3 decades, we've been talking about this and trying to get something done. I remember my predecessor, Mark Rouzan, first ran for office in 1986, and I was a volunteer when in law school on his campaign. I remember sitting around saying like, well, what are the big issues you want to campaign on? And we're like, these students shouldn't have to pay for these textbooks. It's a burden on families. So that was one of his platform items in 1986. So I'm hoping we finally get it done. But these two budget issues are just reflecting kind of a bigger philosophical battle that's going on between the governor and the fiscal leaders in the General Assembly, and it's within his own party. So the governor's position basically is, look, we've got surpluses, we've got a good forecast so far of revenue growth, we have these unmet needs, these kind of holes in what we're supposed to be doing that we haven't been getting done. So let's use this opportunity to fund public health, to eliminate these textbook fees, and kind of fill in the gaps in what the government's doing. The fiscal leaders in the House and the Senate seem to have the mindset that what's really, anytime you add a new dollar to the budget, you're growing big government. And we don't want to grow big government. So anything that has government do one thing more is growing big government, and we don't want to do that, which is why what you hear coming out of the Senate is, hey, let's eliminate the income tax. Hey, maybe we can eliminate property taxes somehow. And it's really part of an effort to squeeze down the resources of the government to the point where even if you wanted to do more things, you couldn't do them. Because to many people, that would be a perfect world in which government is very small and it can't be grown and it can't do very much because they just think the government is not, very valuable at solving society's problems. And so these two different philosophical approaches to government and to budgeting are going to play out over the next several months. And we're going to figure out whether the governor's vision or the General Assembly's Republican vision on that wins out. Okay, looks like my time is ticking down here pretty quickly. Let me just say that if you're interested in the Republican agenda, meaning the bills most likely to pass or get serious consideration, all you have to do is look at House Bills 1001 through 1010. 1001 is always the budget bill in budget years, but What the Republicans have done is they've created a tradition now where they will announce their legislative agenda and they reserve the first 10 bill numbers for their agenda bills. Now, interestingly enough, this year they only have 9 agenda items and there is no 1010, at least not yet. And so just quickly, what we kind of see on their list is they want to reinvent high school with 1002, which really means turning it more into a trade school, a feeder system for employees. And that's kind of where they're going there. 1003 and 1004 try to get these issue of excessive hospital charges and non-compete, non-disclosure contracts, other things that are happening out there that aren't the best. 1005 deals with infrastructure to help with housing. 1006 is an important bill. We can talk about some of these more that would try to divert people away from jail. So that's one I support. 1007 has to deal with energy issues. 1008 is the ESG bill, which would basically prevent pension funds from doing anything that harmed investments in fossil fuels, firearms, and other industries the legislature likes. And then finally, 1009 would allow judges to begin child support at the moment of conception. So that's a follow along to an abortion bill. And I see my time is up.
Matt and Shelley, thank you both for those opening remarks. And now we are going to open the floor for the questions. As I indicated previously, if you are called upon to ask your question, please try to confine your question to 1 minute. And question moderator, do we have someone in the queue?
Yes, thank you, Sunny. We have 3 people in the queue. First up is Georgianne Catalona, then will be Madison for the second question, Madison Miller. So Georgianne Catalona, please unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. I would like to ask about the SB4, which is the Public Health Commission. So I'm not sure if this made it into that bill, and I'm hoping you can tell me. In the Department of Health budget presentation, when they asked for their funding, they specified that local county health departments have to opt in and agree to 20% cost sharing. And I feel some concern about that perhaps not all county health departments, because they'd be daunted by that 20% cost sharing and that they have to provide certain metrics. Can you talk about that? Did that make it into the bill?
Okay, and we will ask Matt Pierce to respond first.
Yeah, Shelley might know what's actually in SB4, but I'm pretty sure that's in there because when we went to the presentation from Senator Kenley and Dr. Box about their commission, what they came up with, they talked about, yes, first of all, they said they wanted to be an opt-in because they feel that if they're just ordered by the legislature to do this, they'll kind of be pushback and resistance, and they really won't have buy-in to getting things done. So they want it to not be seen as a coercive thing. And then secondly, they do want them to have, quote, some skin in the game. So they have to fund 20% of the budget to get the 80% money from the state. And I did ask about that because I had the exact same concern. I said, hey, these guys are strapped. Are they going to come up with this extra money? And Senator Kenley says that they believe the 20% matches up pretty well with what is already being spent in these counties in their current budgets. So he doesn't think it's going to be an additional burden on them to come up with the 20%. But, we'll just have to see.
Okay, Shelley, did you want to respond to that question?
Matt has it correct. It's in there, and the idea is, just as he explained, to have skin in the game for these county and local health departments, and to be able to have it led by their local officials, for them to have a partnership to identify county by county, local health department by local health department, what really needs to be addressed in these local communities. And I mean, I can see the benefit of that approach. I also know that it could politicize something and hold residents of these communities hostage if these issues become political. And additionally, some of these communities are having a hard time finding a licensed provider to serve in local health departments because they don't pay. We already have an issue of access to care in some of these counties, and so this is an issue that I think this bill will need to address, and we'll sort of see how the bill and language changes going forward. But those are some of the concerns that I have as the bill is written.
Thank you very much, Senator Yoder. I believe that Madison, you are next on the list to ask your question.
Thank you. I'm curious if the General Assembly will seriously consider rolling back the state mandated referendum language that emphasizes the percent by which school property taxes will increase. Here in Brown County, you probably know we just had a failed referendum. We were trying to go from 8 cents to 12 cents, which reads over a 33% increase to average property taxes on the ballot, which many people feel is confusing. So just wondering if there is a concerted effort to address this.
All right, and Senator Yoder, we'll go to you first.
Looking over my notes, thank you for that question. I'm not sure if that percentage change or if that language has been filed. I'll have to look, honestly. So many of the bills all of the bills became viewable just this week. And so I haven't made my way through all of them, but I do know there is a bill that I believe is starting, it has started in the Senate, but it gives counties the ability to set up different zoning areas within a county to additionally to cap property tax even more so. So that is of concern to public education, that you could have these zones where you could have additional, I have notes on it. I'm trying to find where I wrote those notes, but there is a bill, not necessarily speaking to the referendum language, but it does change the way counties can create zones to cap property tax collection. And I know that ISTA is very concerned about this because it would impact the amount of funding that local schools would be able to get. I'll get that bill number for you and I'll post it in the chat.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Matt, would you like to weigh in on this question, please?
Yeah, I have not heard any discussion yet about changing this requirement that referendums for additional school funding be couched in terms of the percentage increase, which is incredibly misleading, and I think probably deliberately done that way because the legislature at every turn has tried to make it harder and harder to pass these referendums to let people choose to pay some higher taxes to support their schools. So I know that some advocacy groups for the schools have said they wanted to have this issue addressed in this session, but I just have not heard about where it might happen. So I don't know if that means they've just hit a brick wall talking to the people that control the education committees, or whether they've got kind of a plan to drop something into a bill as it begins to move. But so far I have not heard about that. But as Shelley pointed out, I think we just had our final bill list, which tells you all the bills have been introduced. And so, we're still becoming familiar with what's out there, which I'll just say, is one of the challenges of serving in the legislature. I mean, you get hundreds and hundreds of bills introduced, most of which will never go anywhere. So you're kind of interested in what's in them, but at the same time, your committees start gearing up. And so now you're actually voting on legislation in committee. So you got to spend most of your time really studying carefully the bills you're voting on in committee and prepare any amendments, plus what's beginning to come to the floor. So a lot of times bills will get introduced that never get heard in committee, and I will not even be that familiar with them because I just haven't had time to go back and just see what are the ideas that people are putting out there. So, there's lots of time in a session for other things to pop up.
Thank you so much for that answer, both of you, because I know this has to be an overwhelming time for legislators to really get a handle on what you need to take deep dives into and what you can kind of skim over. I want to call on the next person to ask their question, and that is Christina Lindborg. And I want to encourage anyone else who has a question or maybe a comment to discuss, to add to the conversation, to please get in the queue so that we can make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask their questions or make comments to the representatives on the legislation that we are discussing. So Christina Lindborg, if you would unmute and ask your question, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Good morning, Shelley and Matt, and thank you so much for being here. I would like to know what messaging and strategies you would recommend for us to help you build support, bipartisan support in particular, for the Climate Solutions Task Force bills and also the Greenhouse Inventory Grant Program bill.
All right, thank you, Christina. And Matt, I think you're first up on this one.
Well, it's easy to explain and hard to execute, but the bottom line is you just have to build grassroots support across all of these legislative districts, particularly Republican districts, and you would want to focus first your effort on the legislators who chair the committees or on the committees where those bills have been assigned, right? Because the first stop for a bill is it gets assigned to a committee. Then that committee chair has sole and total discretion as to whether or not that bill gets a hearing. So the first thing you have to do is convince the committee chair to get the bill in hearing. So what I would say is you would want to focus as much effort as you could to contacting people within that chairperson's district and getting those people to, email and call and contact them, raise questions at their town hall meetings to say, hey, we want you to hear this bill. And then you have to fan out from that to all the members of the committee, because if you do get a hearing, then you obviously need to get a majority of the committee to vote it out. So then you have to repeat that same process, whether you use social media, whatever organization tools you have, to get as many people in those districts to contact them. So once you got the bill moving, let's assume you accomplish that, and the bill comes out of committee, now you have to expand it yet again to all members of the House or the Senate, wherever the bill is first moving. And once you get through that process in the first half of the legislature, then you have to start it completely all over again, because bills often pass out of the Senate, come to the House, and don't get a hearing. Same thing can happen with some House bills, get passed over to the Senate, goes to a committee, and the committee chair says, I don't like this bill. So there's no rule that you have to hear a bill just because it passed the other House. So it's just a lot of hard kind of grunt work with grassroots organizing so that legislators hear from a significant number of people in their district.
Thank you very much for that answer. Shelley, if you would please give us your thoughts on this question.
Thank you for the question, and specifically about force. You can work individually. So right now, I am gathering a list of co-authors. I have Republican Senator Ron Alting as a co-author. I have Republican Senator John Ford. And so their constituents can reach out to them and get them to start working. They're already a co-author, so that we can expand sort of at the level of, what I see is if the more co-authors I can get on the bill, then that expands the constituents who can really apply pressure to have their co-author try to get this bill heard in committee. It has, as I mentioned, it's been assigned to environment, and Senator Niemeyer is the chair, and you can apply pressure to have him hear the bill. You can start there, and also start, if you know anybody, Senator Alting represents a West Lafayette area. Senator John Ford represents the Terre Haute area. And I have a couple of co-authors who are signing on. Additional, I'll get you the full list, but I think it's just applying pressure. One person that you have access to, if you are in Senator Cook's district, apply pressure to him to come on to the bill. Good luck. I hope if he was on this call, I would say, please come on the bill. All it's doing is just creating a solutions task force. So we're not approaching climate mitigation and adaptation and all these different siloed off departments in the state of Indiana, but we can have a joint conversation about how we're approaching it. And it could save money in the long run, which is a very conservative approach. Applying pressure to get him to come on the bill would be a great success. So those are some efforts that I would encourage you to continue working on. If you are a part of some grassroots advocacy groups, have them apply some pressure as well to Senator Niemeyer to hear the bill.
Thank you, Shelley. There's power in numbers, right? And
yes, it is.
Even though we feel so powerless as individuals, if we can encourage members of an organization, family, friends, everybody, get on your email and barrage them with your support for certain things, that helps.
Yeah,
you can keep pressing. Just keep pressing that this is a bipartisan effort. There's a language moving through the House side as well. So I'll be quiet with that.
Yeah,
Can I add in? Yeah, if I could just add in something else that you need to know for background in the House. So there's some political things lurking in the background on all these fossil fuel issues, no matter where they come up. So in the last election cycle, the Republican leadership in the House decided they wanted to purge a couple of members, at least two, who they felt were a little bit too extreme and kind of embarrassing their caucus. And so they put millions of dollars into primaries to take those people out. What that did then is it drained their budget a bit for the general election. So what ended up happening is the Americans for Prosperity group, founded in 2004 by the Koch brothers, major owners of fossil fuel industries. They stepped up and basically ran independent campaigns on behalf of the House Republicans. And so if you looked at your direct mail, if you're in certain districts, you'd see on bottom, like paid for by Americans for Prosperity. So when decisions are being made in at least in the House, I believe, about whether you do things for or against fossil fuels, I think in the back of the minds of a lot of people, like, hey, these fossil fuel guys through Americans for Prosperity helped us out in our last election cycle. And those kinds of things, and that gets into whole dark money and all kinds of other issues that we could talk about for days. But I think that is explains some of the reluctance to do anything, at least overtly, on climate change. And the fact that, I can get zero movement on distributed energy, rooftop solar, and a lot of renewable stuff.
Thank you very much for those insights. I know that we went a little bit over time, but it's valuable information for all of us. And I am going to be calling on the next person that I have in the queue. I do see a couple of individuals have raised their hands. And I do encourage you to go into the chat and direct your, if you have a question to ask, just say, I have a question to ask, and that's how you get in the queue for these questions. So the next person I'd like to call on is Bruce Jaffe. Bruce, if you would unmute and ask your question, I believe it will go first to Shelley.
Okay, thank you very much. Matt and Shelley, thank you very much for showing up for this forum. As Sunny pointed out, the other half dozen rough legislators in this area declined to participate in this session. And then my recollection is they did not participate in the last legislative session as well. My question is, are you aware of if this is a statewide decision or boycott by the Republican Party to boycott these League of Women Voter or other legislative forums?
Shelley, would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Bruce. I have not heard if there's been an official boycott, but I hear that throughout Indiana, there's lack of participation from the Republican side. And I don't understand what's going on there. I am trying to work with my office, and Matt, I don't know if your LA has spoken to you about this, trying to create a town hall that is not sponsored by anybody, but would bring this group together, maybe at the library or someplace. Because what happens is people don't get to hear from you, and we don't get to hear from you. We don't get to hear what your thoughts are on certain pieces of legislation. We don't get to, sometimes I don't get to hear how you feel about certain votes, and it's information that I need. It helps me become a more effective legislator. I can understand, obviously, my district more, but I haven't heard an official stance on why our Republican friends aren't participating in forums like this. I just know that they are not, whether it's a debate before an election or legislative updates after elected leaders are elected. It's frustrating because I learn and build relationships with my colleagues through these spaces.
Thank you, Shelley, very much. Matt, would you like to address that question now?
Well, I do think that there is a general strategy. We even see it on the House floor of not engaging on more controversial issues. I think the theory is that, if you create controversy, that will attract what little media is left in the state, and then that might actually get people focused on the issue. So I think there is a general strategy of just not engaging on issues. I think that our particular situation here has maybe more to do with gerrymandering. Now, when I see members coming up on the weekend, I always ask them, like, hey, you're going to come to the legal forum this weekend? And a lot of times they'll tell me they have other forums that are overlapping in other areas. And so one of the side effects of the way they gerrymander is they come in and they take little bites out of counties. So we have little, it's actually a lot better in this recent map than it was before. But, if you're a legislator and the center of gravity of your district is in Terre Haute, and that's where kind of all the votes are, to convince them to get in their car and drive across and participate in this county forum when they've got, a couple townships or something is a hard sell. Plus, I think that they also know that, when I go to a Bloomington forum, I'm going to get pressed on a lot of hard questions from people who probably have very different viewpoints than what that legislator is advancing in the legislature, which may be in sync with people in a place like Bedford or Martinsville or some other area, but not the particular section of Monroe County they might have. And so I think that collectively that adds up to like, well, I got a lot going on in the center of gravity of my district. And if I go over there, I'm just going to kind of get beaten up by these people on the left. So, why bother?
Okay, thank you so much, both Shelley and Matt. I did want to mention that Senator Cook did respond to our invitation and advised that he could not be present today because his mother passed away yesterday. So I did want to make sure that everyone knows that he did respond, but was not able to be here. I believe that the next individual in the queue, I'm sorry, mother-in-law, not mother. I did want to call on the next individual, Jeff McKim. You may unmute and ask your questions.
Thank you very much, Matt and Shelley, for coming to this event. First of all, I just wanted to express my support for Senate Bill 1. I'm very excited to see the certified community behavioral health center funding model be supported, and I hope that moves through. I was wondering if either of you had had seen in the budget or any other legislation that would be expanding or increasing the number of state-run mental health facilities.
Thank you for that question, Jeff. And Matt, I think this one goes to you first.
I haven't seen it yet. I thought that somebody told me there was something in the Senate that was, because we got this 1006 bill, which is going to give law enforcement more the ability to divert people into a mental health system as opposed to just arresting them. And I raised this question about, well, where are they going to go? And I think someone said that that piece was going to start over in the Senate, but I don't know that for certain. It could also maybe end up in the budget bill. So I don't know if Shelley, if you've heard something about that or not, because there was talk about creating regional mental health facilities, but I just don't know if it, made it to the starting line or not.
Okay. Thank you,
Thanks,
Matt.
Jeff. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Shelley.
Thanks a lot.
Jeff, I haven't heard anything specific to that, but I think Senate Bill 1 is trying to create a method to which we can begin building an infrastructure and identifying what would be the best approach to creating either community health centers, hospitals, how we're going to fund them, what the need is. Right now, we don't really have the capacity, or we're not doing that. So I haven't heard if that is going to be the approach or not, but the conversation is just starting. I'll stay connected with you and do a little digging around specifically about your question and see if I can get better answers.
Thank you so much.
Which,
Thank
by
you,
the way,
Jennifer.
sorry, I keep having these afterthoughts. I should throw in that I believe that 1006, which deals with diverting people into a mental health treatment as opposed to incarcerating them, is set for a hearing on Wednesday at 10:30. I don't know if it's been officially announced yet, but I expect that bill to be heard. And that doesn't have funding for centers into it, but I'm definitely bringing that issue up in the committee. And it's like, well, it's great to pass this bill to create this new opportunity to divert people into treatment, but like, where is the treatment going to come from? And maybe we'll get enlightened there as to what the plan is.
Well, and I guess I'm going to exercise my moderator privilege here because I want to dovetail on that question and the earlier bill that you mentioned about the joint resolution 1 making bail not available. Because as a former prosecutor, and I know that prosecutors have testified in favor of that joint resolution, which, but as a former prosecutor, I'm just curious. It seems like we've gone backwards in our handling of individuals who have mental health problems and end up more likely than not in the criminal justice system rather than in a mental health system, and how denying bail to someone dangerous is going to impact our ability to stop that propensity, because it's mainly people who have mental health problems that are being arrested because they appear to be dangerous to themselves or others. So I'm just having a hard time reconciling exactly where all of that is going to go. And I wonder if either of you have a comment on that. Matt?
Well, is Matt first?
No, go ahead, Shelley.
I would just, all I was going to say is preach, Sonny. Yes, I have concern as well. And I don't think joint resolution 1, it stands in opposition of the work that we're trying to do in responding as a state to the behavioral health concerns, to some of the criminal justice reform that we have done over the last 5 to 6 years. It just stands in stark contrast to that work. So I agree with you. And I know you didn't really have a question, but I would like to hear from those on this call on how people feel about this.
Well, and I
because
think I agree. So Matt, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think this is being driven by a little bit of national politics and a lot of Marion County politics. So, as you know, in the last election, the National Republicans really tried to make crime into a major issue, which they hoped would, drive votes their way, even though a lot of times statistics didn't support it. But, every time you watch TV, there's some other mass shooting or something that's really disturbing, and it makes you think that maybe the world's not as safe as you'd like it to be. And so that you got some of that just kind of politic in the national level. And then you've got this interesting dynamic in Marion County, because the Republicans who have a supermajority at the state house and can do whatever they want without consulting any Democrats, when they leave the state house and walk out the door, those Marion County legislators, they step into a blue island, just like Bloomington, where the Democrats dominate the local politics. And this is something that is difficult for them to tolerate. And so what they attempt to do is do things in the state house to override their local elected officials in Marion County, because they don't have the power there. One of the issues that they feel they can really get the Republicans on, or the Democrats on, in the upcoming mayoral election is this issue of crime. And, the interesting thing is they really went after the prosecutor in Marion County in the last election. And they said that, because he'd announced that he was not going to enforce certain crimes, and, is known as a progressive prosecutor. And so they spent a lot of money, really went hard after him, said he's making you less safe by his decisions, and he won by 80%. He had like 80% of the vote. So it failed. And so I think that what's happening is the people who are kind of losing the argument on the local level in Marion County are just bringing that into the state house. And this is the latest one, just to perpetuate the idea that lots of horrible, dangerous, violent people are being let out of jail when they shouldn't be, and then they're victimizing you. And so this amendment, I think, is kind of political messaging, because we have had this on the books since the Constitution was passed, went into effect like in 1852. And there are plenty of ways for judges to keep dangerous people in jail. They can set that bail really high to the point where they're not going to be able to make bail to get out. And so, what I think what will happen if this passes is you're just going to have a lot of minority people spending a long time in jail awaiting trial. And then there's a whole nother discussion you can have about that, because what you find is that poor people who can't bail out of jail, they just plead guilty, because the prosecutor say, like, if you plead guilty to this, I'll just ask the judge to sentence you to time served in the county jail. And so it's like an immediate get out of jail free card if you just roll over and accept the plea bargain. And that happens an awful lot in these bigger cities. And so there's just a lot of negative consequences that I think could flow for it. But, you have to admit, if somebody says like, gee, should we change the Constitution to make sure we can keep violent, dangerous people in jail and not be forced to let them out in the streets? Well, of course, that's a no-brainer. But that's really not how the system's working. The judges recognize who are really violent, and they use that bail system to keep them in there.
Okay, thank you. We got a little bit off on a rabbit trail, but I think maybe it was kind of an important one, both with the comments that both of you had made, and Shelley had asked for feedback on this. And I'm kind of wondering here, we do have the ability, we have 52 people on this call, and I guess I'd just ask if maybe those who are opposed to this constitutional amendment, if you don't mind raising your hands, just to give Shelley and Matt an overall feeling about whether or not you would support this kind of legislation. So if you are in opposition to this kind of constitutional amendment, if you would raise your hand, that might be helpful to them going forward in this legislative session. And then I'm just going to tell everybody who's raised their hands, please make sure and let the committee members know, that your legislative representatives know about your opposition, because this is a big deal. It's going to really impact people in a major way. So anyway, thank you so much. So many of you have raised your hand, and Shelley and Matt, I hope that this is helpful to you, showing that there seems to be quite a bit of agreement with the fact that this is kind of an overkill situation. Judges are elected to help make these discretionary calls. The judges that I know are very conscientious in doing that. So now I think we should probably move on to the next person who has a question. And I believe that the next one in the queue is Dave Burnworth. And Dave, so I'm going to ask you if you would please unmute and ask your questions. And I believe that Matt is going to be the first one up to answer the next question.
Hi, I'm Dave Burnworth. I'm the Executive Director of the Monroe-Owen County Medical Society and have 50 years of experience in medical practices and medicine. As you might expect, I want to ask about Senate Bill 7 for non-competes. Do you have a sense of where this is heading? Thank you.
All right. As I said, I think, Matt, you're first in the queue for this one.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to become law. They're outlawing these non-competes. As you know, the Federal Trade Commission on the federal level said they're also going to try to get rid of non-competes just generally across the economy. But I know my sense is in the House, there's a lot of support for doing that. Quite frankly, what legislators are seeing is we've had a consolidation in the healthcare industry. We have, 2 or 3 major nonprofit systems now that kind of dominate the state. And we've heard a lot from providers that, they're kind of handcuffed because if they're unhappy with their work conditions within one system, they really can't move to another system because they've got these geographic restrictions. And because the system's covering such a large area, it forces them to have to move out of state. And we have less providers here, which is another thing I hear from constituents constantly, is that, it's hard to even get an appointment and, get a general practitioner. And there's other factors there, but I think some of it has to do with the way our institutions are being managed.
Thank you, Matt. And Shelley, would you like to address that question?
I would, just in the interest of time and to hear more questions, I would say I'm right there with Matt. I think it will get a hearing and it probably will be, goodness, I'm trying to think, it might be on the agenda for the Health Committee this coming week, but let me check during my little break here and I'll come back and let you know.
Okay, thank you so much, Shelley. I think that, first of all, I want to remind everyone who raised their hands you can go back into the reactions and lower your hand now that we have concluded that short vote that we had. The next individual in the queue to ask a question is Margaret Clements. So Margaret, if you would unmute and ask your question, then Shelley will be the first one to respond this time.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Shelley and Matt, for showing up today and taking our questions and concerns. Of course, I'm calling in about the Senate Bill 219 that changes annexation. And I think the gist of the new bill is that it eliminates involuntary annexation and that the city, the municipality, must collect signatures from 51% of the property owners in the annexation territory, or 75% of the assessed value of not-for-profits in the proposed annexation area. I would like to urge you to vote for that, but I also would like to see the threshold raised for the not-for-profits or the special condition for the not-for-profits to be eliminated altogether, because it gives too much sway for them over property owners in the community. So if there's any way you can adjust that, or if you could explain how it affects the current annexation efforts here in Bloomington, I'd be really happy to hear your thoughts, but thank you.
Shelley?
Thank you so much, Margaret. Let me do a little bit of research on the new language of SB 219. I'll meet with Senator Buck, I think is the author of that. I haven't had a chance to really digest it yet. And it's so interesting when you don't serve in those committees, you don't hear it as early. You can hear about it later on, but I just need to do a little bit of research and get back to you, Margaret. I don't know what the best is, because then it's just getting back to Margaret and not to the whole group here, but I need to do a little bit more research. And Margaret, what I would appreciate actually, when I reach back out to you, if you, what you said, you would like to see some improvements in the language, let me know what those are, and we can see if Senator Buck is agreeable to those changes.
Thank you.
Yes, and I do want to add that Senate Bill 7, which is the non-compete legislation, is being heard in the Health Committee. I did see and read correctly this coming Wednesday morning.
Shelley, thank you for that. And we do appreciate your caution in trying not to comment if you really haven't studied a bill too. I know it's so early in the session to be able to anticipate some of these questions has to be overwhelming. Matt, did you have any response for Margaret?
Well, I'm not familiar with that bill in the Senate, but if it does pass out of the Senate, the House is not likely to take it up until the beginning of March. So kind of the halftime where each House finishes up consideration of bills introduced in its House is right at the end of February. And there's like a little bit of a pause that first week of March. And then the House will begin working on Senate bills and the Senate will begin working on House bills. And again, it's up to the committee chairs as to whether they move any bills that come, from the other House in the second half. So as far as addressing that issue or any amendments to the bill on the House side, we won't have a shot at that probably until March.
Okay, so there's time to get familiar with it and come up with an appropriate strategy. But it also sounds like maybe Margaret needs to be in some direct communication with Shelley and you on that matter. The next individual in the or individuals in the queue are Jim and Tommy Allison. Jim and Tommy, if you want to unmute and ask your question, and then we will go from there.
Yes, this is Tommy Allison, and I wanted to comment on the no show at public forums. This has been going on for a few years now. And I want to say that in the newspaper, it says that the National Republican Party has decided that siloing information to the public in the debates, that they are now negotiating for public debates for the 2024 presidential election, because they found out that the independents and the Republican suburbs, they needed to reach them as well, and that the siloing of avoiding these public debates are not a good thing for getting their vote. Now, I appreciate we've got two very hardworking and informed people, and I think that they are great. But I think that it's very difficult for the general voter to actually know what the heck is going on in the state. And so what I would suggest is as a way to counter this, because we absolutely have to have an informed voter to be able to get a responsible legislator. And so to counter this, how about concentrating, those who really want to serve the public, concentrating on the three big issues, which is health, education, and environment, and get the message out to the public about what the actual condition is in Indiana. So we take just health, and you've mentioned that we're 45th in the nation and on expenditure on public health. And then you can say what our figures are on maternal and infant health.
Okay, Tommy, you've kind of gone over your time limit here. I think.
Okay. What I'm saying is concentrate, get information out so that you can get help from all the people who really care and our issue committees around the state. So you can concentrate the effort.
Okay, Matt, would you like to respond to Tommy?
Yeah, certainly the sad state of journalism these days has really changed things. I mean, we've basically got this hedge fund newspaper now, which is limping along, and we just don't have things covered. I'm wistful for the old days of Kurt Vander Dusen coming up to the Capitol and asking what all the county, legislators were doing and writing about it. And you kind of knew that if you just got your information into the local newspaper, a majority of the public would hear about it one way or the other. And now, of course, we're in the world of this kind of fragmented social media, and newspapers are kind of out of it. So it makes it very difficult for us to inform people about what's going on. This forum is one of the few places that we can do it. Now, I will put in a plug for, a somewhat new publication now called the Indiana Capitol Chronicle, which is a nonprofit effort. And it's kind of run by a woman named Nikki Kelly, who used to be a longtime State House reporter. She's still there for the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. So she's pretty seasoned. But anyway, it's indianacapitolchronicle.com, or you can just Google Indiana Capitol Chronicle. And they do probably the best job of covering what's going on. They're just kind of focused in on that. Here in Bloomington, we pretty much get the Indianapolis Star stories like 3 days later after they run in Indianapolis. And so I think that's one place you can go to get some more detailed information about the legislature.
Matt, thank you so much for that information and that recommendation. Shelley, would you like to weigh in on this question?
Yes, Tommy, I agree with you. And I'm the great thing is I agree. I think locally, I had actually put in my notes the Indiana Capitol Chronicle too, and let you know. But there again, it's not a printed. You have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to have a device to read it. But it is good if you can sign up for this and support these independent folks who are trying to do good journalism. And the Indiana Capitol Chronicle is trying to do just that. And I would add to that, the public health, public education, and environment, agreed. Those are three issues that we need to keep coming back to and informing folks. So hopefully, I don't even know if it's a possibility to get some answers as to what are these other forums that is in conflict with maybe this time that we have. Can we do something jointly? Can we poll our Republican legislators to find out what is a better time for you if there is a conflict of a regular standing forum that they do? I would like to know what are our options instead of making the assumption that they don't want to participate. Let's find out if there's other ways to do this that would include them.
That's a really good suggestion, Shelley, and maybe something that the league and or chamber might partner in trying to suss out. Thank you for that. I do believe we have another question in the queue from Bill Walters. And so, Bill, would you please unmute and ask your question?
Yes, it regards the Vectren Supreme Court decision regarding how solar energy is charged. And I'm wondering if there's any chance that the legislature might revisit that issue. What Vectren wanted to do and the Tariff Commission approved, as I understand it, was instantaneous charging. And what had been done in the past was the utility companies would settle up at the end of the billing period. And so for individual solar owners, it's going to be a much more expensive process and discourage even more people from doing it.
Bill, thank you for that question. Shelley, would you like to take a shot at answering that one first?
I appreciate that question. And I don't have good news there. I don't see this happening this session, if ever. But I really appreciate, I'm trying to educate myself as much as I can. I'm on utilities. I continue to try to have conversations with Senator Cook, and on the House side, Senator Soliday. there's no holiday, Soliday, because there is a bit of a gatekeeper. I know I started working with a newly elected Republican senator who shares this interest. He represents parts of Tippecanoe County, and initially we were having great conversations, and those have pretty much stopped. That is unfortunate, but I think he started feeling some pressure from leadership. And so I don't have a great answer for you, Bill, but I know we just have to keep trying to educate and do some continue to do grassroots work to change this in the state of Indiana. Matt, add to that.
Yes, your turn, Matt.
Yeah, I'm not very hopeful either, but we're going to take a shot at it. So I've got my eye out for a germane bill that I can offer a second reading amendment on the House floor to force a vote on it. It's very frustrating. They're misinterpreting the statute. The Utility Commission should have never allowed that to happen. I tried to get them to proactively clarify this so we didn't have to wait for the Supreme Court decision, but they said, oh, we shouldn't do anything while there's litigation pending. And they might use that excuse again because that first case, there are 4 other cases based on a similar issue. And Duke Energy, in their case, they kept saying over and over again, ours is different than Vectren because they're absolutely convinced that Vectren is going to lose on appeal. And they did lose in the Court of Appeals, but then the Supreme Court, in an opinion, I guess I won't get into that, it'll take too long. But at any rate, the bottom line, I believe, is that the people in charge of energy policy in the General Assembly today kind of support renewables only in the form of industrial grade renewables where it goes into the major utilities rate base and then they earn a profit off of it. And there has been zero policymaking to support community solar, rooftop solar, microgrids, all the things that could really benefit individual consumers and help us on a road to a zero carbon energy economy. So it's just, they just don't have any interest in it. And I keep kind of banging away as best I can, but I've not made any headway yet.
Thank you very much, Matt and Shelley, for your answer on that question. The next individual in the queue is Carrie Mixa. And then we have 3 more in the queue. I hope we can get to everyone, but we do also have to leave time for closing statements. So I'll do the best I can. But Carrie, at this time, if you would like to unmute and ask your question, you have 1 minute.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. I have one question to ask, but before that, I wanted to point out there was a legislative breakfast this morning in Spencer, and it was sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce there, and Bray was present as well as a few other legislators. So people are showing up. I don't know if it's who's sponsoring it or what, or just because it's Monroe County, but it's unfortunate that representatives like Hall are not present, especially since Brown County is here, and that there was an important question about the referendum language, and that's in his district, Brown County. Anyway, my question is, has to do with the heavy push in advertising for sharing tax dollars with charter schools. 2 bills have been filed, SB 480, that's a Christmas tree bill, SB 398 and HB 1607, which is sharing property tax dollars with charters and transfer students. So students that transfer from one school district to another. Brown County's got that issue in regards to their school district. A lot of kids transfer out of county to other counties. Is there political will to push these bills along because they're practically the same bill?
Thank you, Carrie. And I believe, Matt, you are first in the line to answer.
Yeah, this is all part of the end game to get the money away from the public schools and into the hands of private and voucher schools and just create a system where public schools are not funded directly, that they will have to convince parents to funnel the money to them. And, you know, the first thing when you bring this up, the first thing you hear is like charter schools are public schools. And therefore, they should deserve to get some of the money too. And they point out, it's like, well, they don't have elected school boards. They don't have much transparency. And, they're in a different situation and they just don't seem that interested in it. And so, I mean, the fact that House Bill 1607 was introduced by Bob Boehning, who's the chair of the Education Committee and the #1 champion in the House of this Milton Friedman approach to the world, I think that it'll probably get a hearing and move along. Now, last couple of years, I think people thought like, well, maybe that's even a little bit too far to go. And it kind of lost some steam. So maybe we'll get lucky that way again, but I think they just probably reorganized and are whipping their votes a little harder this time around.
Shelley, would you like to address that question?
I can add to that. I think one of the interesting nuances to this is how Indianapolis Public Schools has created a real complication, because in the Indianapolis public school system, you have a lot of charter schools and in lobbying efforts who traditionally you thought were supportive of traditional public education. They're now lobbying for this measure, for this bill, for this language. And that makes it really difficult for a caucus of 10 in the Senate, my caucus, the Democrats, who stand with traditional public education. The majority of them are elected in Indianapolis, and we're standing strong, but I can see that it gets harder and harder. So I don't know, Carrie. I haven't heard whether or not this is going to get a hearing. I would imagine it would. If it comes over from the House, I would imagine it would. But it hasn't. It's had some real roadblocks in the past in the Senate. But I'm just giving you sort of a nuanced complication of how it gets harder and harder when Indianapolis Public Schools has pretty much turned into a much different public school system than what we know in our district.
Yeah, it's wild that Bob Enlow is really backing this. There's a lot of campaign dollars going into this marketing push that you see regularly on TV to balance the playing field, allegedly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Matt and Sherry. I'm going to advise everybody that the next person in line to ask a question is Yvonne Hensley. And then we have Don Bird and Christina Hitchcock, and I'm going to kind of cut off any questions after Christina so that Matt and Sherry can make their final comments. And so Yvonne, if you would unmute and ask your question, and I believe that Shelley will be the first to answer this one.
Hi. So I was just wondering, because the Farm Bill is coming back in play this year, pertaining to your environmental bill that's coming, or that you're doing as well. We're a huge agricultural county. How is that also playing a role in your bill as well? Because with that being said, Mike Bruin is all about technology right now and about budget cutting. So how is that going to make a play for you with trying to also make your bill heard?
Okay, Shelley.
Well, hi, Yvonne. Are you talking about the climate solutions bill?
Yeah.
The task that, okay. Well, hopefully we will. The nice thing is if there is room, if it gets a hearing, and if there's room for some language on, how, if the task force should address some agricultural concerns, we can add that. I know I'm talking with Senator Glick to get her to sign on to the bill. She cares about different climate issues. We share a passion for protecting wetlands, and trying to get her to sign on the bill because she represents a district in Indiana that's a heavy agriculture district up in northern Indiana, as well as Senator Lysing. Getting her, she really cares about large solar and wind installations when it comes to renewables, making sure that farmland is protected. Well, we should have that part of the task force. So if we could get them onto the bill and get the bill heard and move Indiana towards coming up with a plan, a vision for Indiana, I think that would be a good step forward. But Yvonne, look over the language and get me your thoughts on how we can make it better.
Thank you, Shelley. Matt, how would you like to take that question on?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that other than just that I know that oftentimes when it comes to getting farmers involved in environmental activities and things, if you can provide some incentives as have been done in the federal bills about having them change their farming techniques to limit impacts on the environment, oftentimes you can get some good participation, but it takes providing some incentives.
Thank you very much, Matt. The next individual in line is Don Bird, and I would ask Don to unmute, and let's try and make our questions and answers as efficient as possible so that we have time to listen to the final remarks.
Okay, thank you. I'm the state coordinator for Braver Angels, a national organization trying to depolarize the country, trying to get people together. And in that role, I talk quite a bit to local Republican leaders as well as Democrats. And I've heard from at least one, I think two Republican leaders about the non-participation in league events, that they feel that LWV is a left-leaning organization and therefore they don't want to participate, which is, kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy if that's the case. I'm wondering if you, Shelley and Matt, feel that that's really a big part of it.
Matt, you're first on this one.
No, I think that's an excuse. I think that what they don't like is the fact that, most of the people in Bloomington, if not Monroe County as a whole, have different perspective on things and push them and ask hard questions. And you don't get that when you're in the rest of your district where people are aligned with your own views. So, I mean, you can either go to kind of an affirming meeting where you talk about let's not let government get too big and everybody's like protect my guns and all that kind of stuff and you're cheered on, or you can go to a place where people are going to say I'm not very happy with your vote, here's my perspective and I've got some hard questions for you. I think that's really just the reality of it. There are hard questions over here. Just like I'm sure that if my district extended to Bedford or Martinsville and I went to a forum up there, I bet you I'd be getting a lot less love and a lot harder questions. I think it's just the reality of the situation.
Thank you, Matt. Shelley, would you like to weigh in, please?
And that is true. I have fond memories of running for Congress, and it's just different throughout the rest, the more southern parts of the state. When you get down there, you encounter different questions, but it goes back to my point about it also helps legislators get to know each other and find out how we can find some shared common ground. I was reminded that this is possible this week. I was at a reception and Matt, one of your newly elected colleagues in the House, came up to me and he said, I've been wanting to meet you because I'm new to the House and I filed your legislation in the House. And I was like, you filed my legislation. I'm going through my head trying to figure out what did I file, because I made an assumption that he was a Republican. He said he was from Frankfurt. It's Representative Mike Genda. And he said, I filed your period tax. I filed the repeal of feminine hygiene products in the House. And he's a Republican. And he said, I think that's the right thing for Indiana. And we had the best conversation. And it was a lesson for me. I told him he made my whole week. We're going to find a path forward, try to find some events where we can talk about this further. And based on that conversation, I was able to have another conversation with our tax and fiscal chair, Travis Holdman, Senator Holdman. He's supportive, and he was going to make a positive recommendation to our chair of appropriations, Senator Mishler. So these conversations are really important. They can surprise you. They're difficult, but they're important. And I stand with you. I think we have to find other ways. And hopefully, even with the League of Women Voters, what is the conflict? And maybe we can work together with different kinds of organizations to have these legislative updates.
Shelley, thank you for that answer. And I think you've given Don some hope and the rest of us too. And thanks for the question, Don. Now I'm going to the last individual that I'm going to call on, and that's Christina Hitchcock. Christina, would you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, thank you for going over a little bit. And I apologize if this question gets, the topic is a little big. But I was just curious. I have a student who graduated from MCCSC last May, and then I have a current junior in high school. And the changes that have been required for graduation just between the two of them is kind of crazy. And so I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit about what the rationale seems to be for the effort to change the graduation pathways. Yet again, it's very confusing for families. I'm sure it's very frustrating for educators to try to, wrangle these constantly changing expectations and demands.
Christina, thank you for that question. And Shelley, we'll turn to you first.
Well, I agree with you. And one thing that,
there you go. We lost you a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just saying, I think you would have educators agreeing with you as well. One thing that I've heard loud and clear is teachers feeling that their profession is just undermined left and right, and all of these unfunded mandates and changes that come down from the legislative process aren't always informed by best practice, aren't informed by good education policy, but rather informed by lobbying efforts from I guess, people who want to see something different in the school system. So it's a little bit of a yo-yo act, up and down, changing all the time. And there again, one of the top priorities this session is going to be rethinking and reconfiguring high school. So I think we're going to see new changes happening in high school. So your frustration is heard. I know that educators are feeling it. They're leaving the profession, which is not helping solve the problem of creating some certainty for parents. And it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Number one, we don't fund it. Number two, we're constantly changing the end game. And number three, we don't support the profession. So how can we be surprised that there's a teacher shortage? I hear you, and I hope that we can have this conversation in the education committee this session, but we'll definitely be hearing something from the House side.
Thank you, Shelley. And Matt, would you like to weigh in on Christina's comments?
Yeah, the legislature has just exhausted everybody in the education profession. And I've said a bunch of times over the years that if we would just take a pause and let everybody catch their breath, it would be nice. But it seems like they're always flailing around to go back and fix the things they kind of messed up before, and then they keep pushing their agenda a little further because it's an incremental thing. And in the curriculum, they do a bunch of stuff and it doesn't really work, or they're not getting the result they want, so then they change it around again. And I agree, it's constantly changing, and we never, it seems like, step back, allow things to operate for a while, and then really evaluate how effective, what are the outcomes when these things are happening. And so I think, unfortunately, it's just going to keep happening because, for example, the speaker in a speech, he said, we need to reinvent high school. It's an old 20th century system. We're in the 21st century now. So we need let's get a whole new thing in here. And it looks like the whole new thing is to have students determine what career they want to work in high school. And then they just go to work. And you're maybe in high school for 3 days and you're doing an apprenticeship out in a workplace somewhere for 3 days. So it's really, we'll see what the bill looks like when it actually starts moving. But I think that the idea is that high school is going to be a training ground for businesses that need workers. And it's going to be a heavier emphasis, I think, on craft trades than on, more of a college track kind of high school experience.
Thank you, Matt. We've now reached the end of our questioning sessions and want to give each of our representatives an opportunity to do closings. And Matt, I'm going to call on you first at this juncture.
Well, we've already said a lot today, and we're a little bit over time, so I won't go on too long. I'll just say that, this issue of working with the other party, when you're a Democrat and you got 30 members in the House, you got to find 21 other people if you want to make something happen. And I've been fortunate every now and again, not very often, but to get amendments adopted. But more importantly, I found that if you work behind the scenes and you can talk to people one-on-one, you can make things happen. You can affect outcomes. It's not easy to kind of coerce the other side into changing their approach to things in a more public way. So I tend to kind of work behind the scenes. And I found some Republican, it runs the gamut. You got some Republicans who just look at Democrats as some kind of horrible people who are trying to destroy our society. They don't really want to talk to you. And you got the other end of the spectrum. You've got Republicans who are very open, and I've teamed up with a number of Republicans on different issues. Others, you got to work a little harder to bring them around, but that's the bottom line. So what does that mean in general? I think what it basically means is that until voters make different decisions about who's in the legislature, it's difficult for Democrats to prevail on the bigger philosophical questions, whether it's budgeting or government programs, childcare, a lot of this kind of stuff. It's just, abortion is a classic example. It's just, you're not going to move the needle on that with the majority. But there are lots of other issues that are not like these super ideological fault lines where we can get some cooperation and a little bit of progress, although maybe not as fast as I would like. So I'll just leave it on that note.
Matt, thank you very much for those remarks. And Shelley, would you like to make some remarks in closing?
I wanted to just say thank you to everyone who's logged on. I want to say it's on me to make sure that I stay. I give out my cell phone because what is helpful is if maybe a phone call is easier for you. My number is 812-327-4249. And if there's something that you care about, maybe it's intimidating to get on these calls to ask questions, but if a one-on-one phone conversation or sending me a text is a little simpler, please do that. I am going to continue to try to put together a town hall with all of our electeds for Monroe County that is not sponsored by anybody, but hopefully we can get folks to come out to that, and hopefully we can have it in person, because maybe that is something that some people can participate in terms of people who are living in the district or in Monroe County, maybe a little easier or preferred. But I thank everyone for engaging in this process. Continue looking over, stay engaged, and I look forward to next month's legislative update.
Thank you, Shelley. I too want to thank both of you for making yourselves available. And I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that perhaps we can get more of our legislators at the next legislative update, which will be Saturday, February 11th. And we will be sending out an email to remind everyone of that. And you do need to register for that. So I just want to thank you, thank our legislators, and thank all of you who have joined us today to become more informed about what's going on in our legislature. I want to thank Community Access Television services. And I also want to thank our sponsors, the League in Bloomington, Monroe County, and Brown County, and the Chambers of Commerce for Greater Bloomington and Brown County. I look forward to another exciting discussion next month with all of you, and hopefully more. So everyone have a wonderful rest of the day. Keep following. We're furnished, thankfully, with lots of resources like the Indiana Capitol Chronicle that we can help keep informed as the legislature is in session. So look forward to seeing everyone again on February 11th. Thank you very much. Have a great day.